I'm also curious how you think about and how the folks that you talk to and cover, how you all think about the education system. So one of the things that's really critically important when, kids come into someone's life, they all of a sudden get very focused on their schools, their
Mhm.
local schools. They think about all the different options out there. And this is another space that parents will say feels a little overwhelming. Like when I was a kid, I just went to the public school down the street and you hope for the best. And
Mhm.
now, there's some parents who want to or prefer to do more of a homeschooling or a non-traditional schooling, or there might be a private school that they can test into, or maybe they can afford. There's different attitudes now about what education should look like in the early childhood years and later. How are parents navigating this question of education today, in again an era where you don't know exactly what the future is going to look like? You're just trying to get the basics, so the kids have a foundation of learning.
Yeah, it's incredibly overwhelming. I think back to when I was growing up, and sure, there was word of mouth about this is a good school district and this is maybe a school district that's not quite as resourced or not quite as, the results aren't quite as good as they say. But there weren't these lists that you could access at the tap of a button ranking all the schools. There weren't grades given to each school that you could just like look up within 5 seconds. There also wasn't all this online chatter about how public schools are like prisons for children and how you should homeschool your children. The homeschooling movement is really taking off, and I think it can be a wonderful option for a lot of families. I don't think it's right for every family, though, and I think that parents are feeling a lot of pressure if they're not going to homeschool their children. I see a lot of people who say I never ever expected to homeschool my kids, but now the pressure is really getting in my head of people saying that the outcomes are so much better, or that you're going to, children have more mental health issues if they're going through the public school system, or there's all these claims, right? And a lot of them are really not grounded in reality. But yeah, there's a lot to think about. There's also the element of, quite frankly, in the United States, every single day you send your children to school is scary because you don't know what will happen between the time you drop them off and the time you pick them up. Because, you know, the unspoken reality is that every parent is terrified that the unthinkable could happen to their kids. So there's that, and I think that that is one of the biggest stressors on modern day parents today is just this feeling that our world is not as safe as it should be for our kids, and that we don't know the best way to shield them from one, some of the really, really dangerous things that happen in schools, but also some of the other things like the mental health issues, like the bullying, like just exposure to different concepts that maybe you aren't comfortable with them being exposed to. I don't let my kids ride the school bus because I've just heard so many kids learn violence on school buses, or learn profanity, or say really cruel things to one another. So there's just this need to sort of understand what your child is exposed to now that I think wasn't as much of a concern in previous generations. And it is hard because, you know, there's not everybody even has options. And when you do have options, they can be incredibly overwhelming to parse through.